Well, let's talk about that with Seb Gorka. He's Deputy Assistant to President Trump and a Senior Director for Counterterrorism in the White House, and joins us once again. A very, very good afternoon to you, Sebastian.
Greetings. Good afternoon, Julia.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. It always starts nicely with us, doesn't it? It always starts nicely. Now, Donald Trump made a very big play about these tariffs and how basically this was a declaration of economic independence, Liberation Day, leaving aside what's going to happen to the world economy or what the impact on the UK economy, just in terms of the impact on the American economy. I was a bit confused. He seemed to be claiming that there was going to be billions coming in from the tariffs, which would help the American economy and could lead to tax cuts for Americans, although of course they're a tax on American consumers. At the same time as saying this could lead to sort of trade deals and going to zero tariffs with other countries. Now, it can't do both at the same time, can it?
Well, it can, because there are 200 countries in the world, Julia. And some of them will react properly and sensibly and in the common sense fashion, and others may not. So with those who understand why it's happening, and with those who want to see the collective pie grow, they will react properly and they will remove those obscene tariffs. We have one country, for example, Japan, that has a 700% tariff on the import of US rice into that nation. When they realize that their goods will be affected, then those nations will take action to level the playing field. But of course, this is a temporary measure to instill some kind of common sense into those nations that are using punitive rates, tariffs, and taxes against US goods. It's a leveling of the playing field. We're not going to be the world's piggy bank anymore. We're not going to see US manufacturers penalized because their goods are the best.
Okay, I mean, I can see a perfectly fair argument, reasonable argument to say, free trade, fine, but fair trade better. And there's an element of protectionism in virtually every country. I mean, pretty much every country, I think apart from Singapore, maybe, I don't even know, has some level of protection tariffs, just so, you protect key aspects of your agriculture or some of your industrial production, steel production and things like that. However, there's no doubt at all, America has had lower tariffs against some countries than they've had against them. But is that the reason why people aren't buying some US goods? Or is it the case, say, for instance, with car manufacturing, we don't buy American cars because, with all due respect, a lot of them aren't very well made. They're often gas guzzling. Your gas prices are much lower than ours, and they're rather too big for our streets. You can't park them anywhere. So it's got very little to do with tariffs. It's more to do with people sometimes don't want to buy some of those US goods, and you've got an awful lot of better off, a large number of well-off consumers who can afford to buy our goods.
Well, I would believe that if it weren't the case that I drive a Ford Mustang, which is easy to park, and I love my Ford Mustang. And on top of that, the fact is, why are they punished then? Why are certain nations punished? If the product isn't good, you wouldn't have to tariff against it. It's because it is so flipping good that you have these outrageous things being done to US products. So I think your logic collapses at a certain point.
So is the plan, you say these are temporary measures. He didn't say that yesterday, but you're saying these are temporary measures, and clearly then the plan is, it's basically a wake-up call for governments around the world. Lose your tariffs, bring them down. Let's get back to some more a better playing field in terms of trading. And at that point, it's better trade for America. But here's the thing. If that were the case, would that actually lead to more onshoring of manufacturing to the United States? Because that's another thing Donald Trump's promising. And you had, of course, those representatives of workers from some of those key swing states where, a lot of manufacturing jobs have gone. They've been shipped to Mexico, shipped to China, whether it's to technology or just cheaper labour. And basically saying, look, I want you, if you want to get rid of these tariffs, you have to come and base your factory, base your plant here in the US, where you can provide those jobs to American people. Now, there are a lot of people in Britain who go, yeah, we love a bit of that here. We've offshored an awful lot as well. But if other countries basically relege on their tariffs and they say, right, OK, we'll cut those tariffs, then you won't see that happening, will you?
Well, it's already happened. I don't know if you've been tracking the unbelievable decisions made by massive companies, including Microsoft and others. Even before the inauguration, we had commitments made by CEOs standing next to President Trump in Trump Tower saying they're going to bring if you add it all up, it is now in excess of multiple trillions of dollars worth of investment and jobs to the UK, to the US, because they realized what President Trump was going to do and they wanted to get out in front of it. So literally trillions of dollars have already been committed by CEOs to the United States to bring those jobs back. So it's not a hypothetical. It's actually happening right now because people realize this is a businessman and he means what he says.
Okay, but they bring those jobs back to the States, but if the tariffs change, then there won't be the economic benefit of that and they'll ship back out again.
No, but it's not just about economic. Look, this is really crucial to understand. We don't look at America as an economic unit. This is the absolute travesty of modern trade and economics. So they look at human beings as things that create wealth. We look at our country as a nation, as people, as a community. So we look at that as not just, oh, will it affect tariffs on the long term? We want human beings to be treated as human beings and for those jobs to come back. If you want to really understand what happened yesterday, I strongly recommend to all of your viewers and listeners, do one thing. You'll have a Damascene moment if you read Hillbilly Elegy. From a man who back then...
J.D. Vance, the vice president's book about his life.
Yeah, J.D. Vance, who wasn't a real Trump supporter way back when, wrote this book about how his working class family was destroyed by not just the Democrats, not just the left, but the establishment conservative Republicans saying, oh, who cares where things are made? We can offshore them to cheap labor in China and Mexico, and how a whole generation and more were betrayed and lives were destroyed, how his mother ended up a drug addict as well. If you want to understand why tens of millions of working class Americans voted for my boss, a billionaire from Manhattan, then you need to read that book and understand.
That makes a lot of sense.
This is about human beings, Julia.
There is an awful lot linking that argument to the arguments for Brexit made by people like myself and many others back in 2016. And again, all the years after that, we were still fighting for it to happen. And I know, we were talking to you around that time as well. And the argument being that, this idea that, we're all economically better off. Well, we're not. Some people get better off from free movement of people, but not everybody does. People whose jobs are lost to people working cheaply from Romania and Poland aren't better off. They're not reaping the benefits, but also there is an issue of community cohesion, about people's quality of life that isn't just about pounds, shilling and pence. Let's talk about some could say the Brexit dividend that the UK has received. We've not been treated as the EU bloc. Now, there are various countries in the EU that have massive trade surpluses with the US, like Germany. We don't have a big surplus. We're kind of pretty even on trade. We've been hit with the base rate of 10% tariffs. EU has got 20%. Is that a Brexit dividend?
I think that's a fair way to look at it geopolitically. I think President Trump is very, very happy that the UK is now a sovereign nation. People miss this when we discuss or analyze what America first means and make America great again. An underlying theme in everything we do is sovereignty. This is the rebirth, the revivification of nations acting as nations and not being beholden to globalist projects, to attempts to create, one world of peace and harmony, which underneath is really an exercise in the accretion of power for those who aren't actually elected to public office. So absolutely, we want nations to be sovereign, and I think the deal that the UK received yesterday is a inference, is a recognition of that.
I mean, it was the base rate. We didn't get zero tariffs. It wasn't actually equivalent to the tariffs we put on US goods. So we didn't do badly, but we didn't do any better than anyone else. The government has said today they are disappointed. They said there will be an economic impact. We're talking about thousands of jobs being lost here in the UK. How much of this, the position that Britain is in today in terms of those tariffs, how much is down to just the balance of trade? How much is down to Keir Starmer and his relationship with Donald Trump over the last 6 months, last year? How much is down to an invitation from the King to come on as another state visit? How much is down to the special relationship? And how much is down to, well, you're just another country along with every other, and you get the 10% base rate?
Well, it's definitely not the latter. I'm a little bit bemused, or rather amused, by the British press's reaction to yesterday's news that everyone else in the classroom gets a D grade, the Brits get a B and you're complaining that you only got a B grade while everybody else gets a D.
Everyone, we're among 60 countries who got the D grade.
Why can't you celebrate the fact that it's only 10% and that you can negotiate your way out of it if you take certain measures? So, and let's be clear, I've said this time and again on your show, Julia. President Trump has a very special place in his heart for the UK, for historic reasons, familial reasons. The idea that this is somehow you're just another country, it's utterly fallacious.
You say we can negotiate our way out of it. Okay, give us some advice. What can we pass on to Keir Starmer? What should he do?
I am a US government employee who works in the White House. I am not going to give advice to the duly elected premier of another country. I think the logic for all nations is clear. Don't penalize our products, then you won't have punitive tariffs. It's really that easy. It's nothing more complicated. The mathematics are very simple.
There's no doubt at all that the UK government has kept their powder dry. There doesn't seem to be a knee-jerk reaction. I think largely most people think that's a good idea. We are a David to your Goliath. We ain't going to win a tariff war with a much, much, much bigger trading partner. The EU, as a bloc, see things differently. There's a lot of talk from Ursula von der Leyen, the European Union Commission President, and other European leaders about retaliatory tariffs. We know we're seeing them from China and other countries as well. What will happen if the EU raises tariffs to the same amount on US goods or higher? What will happen next?
Yes, a lot of talk, I think, is the best descriptor for the most of the things that come out of Brussels. I think you'd agree with me. Look, I'm not going to predict what will happen with regards to the EU, because the EU has to decide one very simple question. Do they want to have, as you said at the beginning, this is about free trade that is fair. Does Brussels want to have trade relations with the United States, the largest economy in the world, that are based on fair relations? I would say if you're a decent group of people, you would say yes to that. And there is a road to that if you do things that are not punitive to US goods. Again, it's very simple. Do they want to have good relations with the greatest power in the world? I would think that's a good idea.
Can I ask you about some of the tariffs? Lots of people were questioning why Russia wasn't mentioned on tariffs, but Ukraine is 10% tariffs. But although it seemed to me rather obvious, there are sanctions, so there aren't any tariffs at the moment. But for some reason, there was a 10% tariff imposed on the Heard and McDonald Islands. Why was there a 10% tariff imposed on basically a rocky outcrop with 2 active volcanoes, not a single human being, and a lot of penguins?
Well, because it's a piece of territory that can be used to transport goods through. I mean, the level of asinine analysis by the mainstream legacy media is really quite stunning.
You put 10% tariffs on a tiny outcrop island near Antarctica.
Let me finish.
Come on.
The idea that, there's only a few people or some penguins.
No people.
So what? So what?
Well, then they're not.
Why are there so many ships that are registered to nations that don't have shipping industries? Because they are of utility to play a silly game in world economics and trade. Why are there so many? This is just, if they have a punitive tariff, a message will be sent to don't exploit that relationship. With regards to Russia, we're in the midst of the most important negotiations of the modern age to stop what my boss, the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, calls the meat grinder of the Ukrainian war. And he's absolutely right to say that. So I think let's concentrate on stopping the deaths of thousands of young men every week with regards to that.
Well, we could do that. We talked about this before. If your boss, your ultimate boss, Donald Trump, called his big mate Vladimir Putin and told him to stop killing Ukrainians, then the war would be over.
Yeah, I'm not going to...
just saying, it's a simple way to stop the killing.
Julia, okay. You got me irritated last time. I'm not going to take the bait.
All right, then. Well, sorry for my facts. Let's come back one final point.
What are the facts, then? What are the facts?
No, you said you didn't want to go there. No, we did it last time.
His mate? What are the facts for that?
We did it last time. Let's talk about...
What are the facts?
We haven't got much time, and I know you've got other interviews to get to.
No, but you can't get away with that.
Okay, sorry.
You say that's facts.
The facts that if Donald Trump's got such a good relationship with Vladimir Putin, why doesn't he tell him to stop invading a foreign nation state, to stop bombing and killing the Ukrainian people, and then the Ukrainian people wouldn't be killing Russians, and the whole meat grinder would stop tomorrow.
How is he his mate?
he keeps talking about how they're friends.
How is he his great man?
I don't think they are. He claims he is.
Have you heard of the Wagner Group?
Yes.
Do you know what
I know, we
Wagner
talked
Group
about
is?
this last week, yeah.
Yeah. So President Trump killed more than 300 Russian soldiers the first time around who were working for Vladimir Putin. No American president has done that, not since the October Revolution of 1917. I'm not sure that qualifies.
You're saying they're not friends.
Mate.
Okay. Right, let me just come back onto now. Look, you've explained the reasoning, the rationale behind these US tariffs and what you want other countries to do in response and what the benefit can be for the United States. And you'd argue, I suppose, the benefit for those countries if they did drop those tariffs. However, there is that concern, and I would probably share your should we say, dubious questioning of, all the world's economists say one thing, does that mean it's true? They've been wrong about an awful lot of other things over the years. But when there is so much concern that these could lead to a sort of a world economic, trade war, a collapse of, global trade, warnings of a worldwide recession, the reality is we don't really know what the reaction is going to be. Donald Trump has effectively thrown a grenade into the world economic order. We're not going to know how things turn out and who's benefited and who hasn't until the smoke clears. Are you sure that we are not going to be heading into basically a world economic downturn led by your boss, Donald Trump?
Oh, I'm absolutely convinced that's not going to happen. Look, with Brexit and with President Trump's first election into office and now his historic victory of 77 million Americans voting for him, the age of experts is dead. I mean, can we just put a stake through the heart of this idea that experts should be respected? Are these the experts who said that the vaccine would mean you'd never catch COVID? Are these the experts that said putting a mask on a 5-year-old child is good for them? The age of experts is gone. Salt the earth over it. Rip it up and just bury it. We don't believe in the quote-unquote unanimity of experts. We believe in the people to make decisions that are good for them and to choose the leaders who will represent them. So I couldn't give a flying toss what the experts say.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Seb Gorka, Deputy Assistant to President Trump and a Senior Director for Counterterrorism, senior figure, both advisor in the first Trump administration as well. Absolutely going for it there, Philip Pingree. I mean, he's been out defending his boss. He makes some very good arguments. They're very, very strong arguments. And again, interesting that point about the Herd Islands, which is a fair point. Could that be used on a technicality?
Well, it's interesting. Our listeners are doing some research on our behalf, and apparently in 2022, the islands exported $1.2 million worth of heavy equipment to the United States.
Interesting. So it has been used before. That makes sense.
So he's right.
So yeah, absolutely, very interesting. It's why we like our audience, get in touch all the time. He's basically saying, look, these are temporary.
Yeah.
You can negotiate your way out of it.
Yes.
That's basically the message.
And that fits. You get a free trade deal, but there's a few other things that are interesting. The whole thing. One, US instilling common sense. We're forcing our views. Is what Sebastian said. He talked about nation states. Does that therefore mean that Donald Trump sees the EU as a globalist project? It's getting away from the nation state, and that's why he's attacking the EU so much. But then if we get into the detail, put the Heard and McDonnell Islands to one side and get into something more serious, he called Taiwan a country. The US officially recognises a one China policy. It had Taiwan and China as separate and called Taiwan a country. That is a massive geopolitical implication when it comes to China's view.
China will not have not noticed that.
Exactly.
The world was watching that.
And it's that level of detail. You could have said country/regions or country/autonomous provinces, but he said country.
Yeah.
There's
been a lot of diplomatic nuance on that, deliberately to avoid offending. Personally, I'm a big fan of that. Make that clear.
I think
Although he hasn't
it's
said
great.
he would defend Taiwan militarily, so that's a bit of a worry.